All right, why don't we get started here? I think we more people will be coming on board as the conversation progresses. But would love to get in conversation with Dick as soon as possible. So I know this person needs no introduction, but Dick Gephardt served 28 years in Congress under 5 presidents. He was majority leader of the Democratic Party for 8 years of those 28. He worked on major budgetary issues, healthcare reform issues, domestic and international terrorism, 2 wars, impeachment, public health and safety. He's basically seen it all and done it all. As many of you know, he ran in the primary for president in 2004 and was on various lists to be vice president for both Clinton and Obama. In addition to serving on Issue One's board of directors, he's also a member of our National Council on Election Integrity, and he co-chairs our Council for Responsible Social Media. He wears at least 6 additional hats that I know beyond the work that he does with us, and he never seems to rest. At age 82, he is a shining example to us all of what it means to have an unabiding commitment to democracy and civic life. Plus, he is a fellow St. Louisan. He and I grew up about 7 miles from each other, and have always had that connection. So, Dick, welcome to this conversation. It's great to see you.
Thanks so much, Nick. I'm a huge fan of Issue One and Council for Election Integrity and Council for Responsible Social Media. And I just thank you and the whole Issue One team for what you do day in and day out to protect our democracy. So I'm proud to be part of this in a small way. And I look forward to this conversation.
Well, here's the book. And by the way, Dick, one of the many things I love about the book is that when you take the jacket cover off, it still has the full design on it, because I can't stand jacket covers. They're always getting crumpled up and falling down and stuff like that. So there's the book, folks. Dick, I want to start off with your childhood, because in many ways it reads as an American dream story. Your dad was a milkman. Your mom was at home, I think, when you were younger, and then had an administrative job. You were an Eagle Scout. You went to church on Sunday. You were grown up, being told you had to live by the golden rule. I think you were a scholarship kid to Northwestern, served in the Air National Guard. So just tell us a bit about, the St. Louis that you grew up in and the household that you grew up in.
Sure. So I'm a lucky person. That's all I can tell you. And certainly the 50s when I grew up was a very different time than we have today. I would readily admit that. But my parents were awesome people. Neither of them got through the first year of high school. My dad was a milk truck driver and a teamster, and he lost that job after 10 years. So he really never had another job. We were almost on unemployment or something, welfare. My mother went to work finally because somebody had to bring some money in. But they were wonderful people, and they taught me the golden rule every day. My mother used to say to me, Dick, treat other people the way you'd like to be treated, because you're going to get back what you give out. One time she even said to me, practicing the golden rule is the most selfish thing you can do, because you're going to get good stuff back if you're giving good stuff out. So that was a wonderful way to grow up. And we went to church and public schools in the city of St. Louis. I had fabulous teachers. It had never entered my head to go to college. I had a school teacher at Southwest High School in speech. And one day after class, I can still see her name was Ms. Meenick. She stopped me and said, I think you could get a scholarship to go to Northwestern in speech. And I didn't know what she was talking about. And she said, go ask your parents and I'll help you fill it out. She did. I got the scholarship. I get on the train. We used to travel by train. I'm that old. And I go to Chicago, take the L up to Evanston, walk onto that campus, I'm there with champion debaters, champion dramatists, champion extemporaneous speakers. I thought I had landed on Mars. I had never been out of St. Louis
Hmm.
in the 17 years of my life. So
Hmm.
this was a transformational experience. I also got to go to the American Youth Foundation camp 4 summers while I was in college and law school. That's the Danforth Foundation Camp Minnewanka, which was a leadership training camp. I went there 2 weeks each summer for 4 summers. And so I had, you know, amazing opportunities. And it made me understand that no matter where you come from or who you are, this is the land of opportunity. And I was always so grateful for my upbringing and for all the opportunities I had. So America is magical. And I keep saying to people today, they talk about immigration and it's a mess and so on. I say, yeah, it is. It's messed up, but I don't see anybody trying to leave America. I see millions of people trying to get into America, and that will never end because this is the land of opportunity.
By the way, I should have mentioned up front to the audience members that Dick and I are going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we really want to open it up to Q&A, which you can submit through the button on your Zoom screen. So Dick, you get to college, you're doing speech and drama. I think you were in a play at one point, in fact, maybe even thinking about a career in drama until I think, as you said in the book, you realized that there were kids up there who were probably a lot better on stage than you were. So when did you get the political bug? I mean, when and how did that happen, that you decided that politics was something that animated you?
So I entered college in 1958. I was always interested in civics and government. And so I ran for vice president of the freshman class at Northwestern. In my junior year, I ran for president of the Student Senate, which was kind of the student government organization. And I won both those races. But most importantly, in 1960, John Kennedy was elected president, and I thought he was awesome. He was smart. He had come from wealth, and he had given his whole life to public service. And I thought, man, that's a great thing to do with your life if you can. And then when I was in law school, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and John Kennedy was killed when I was in a torts class at Michigan Law School. And I just thought, boy, we're in a bad place right now, and I need to do public service. So I came back to St. Louis in the neighborhood I'd grown up in, South City, and I went to the local Democratic organization and volunteered to Phelim O'Toole, who was the committeeman of the 14th Ward.
Oh, the guy in the wheelchair who had the cigar.
Yeah, he had the cigar, and he looked at me and
character,
said,
right?
What are you doing here? What do you want? What are you asking? I said, I just want to volunteer. He said, we don't have volunteers here. I said, okay, I just want to volunteer. He said, okay, you can be precinct captain of the 2nd precinct. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, you got to go door to door, meet everybody in the precinct, keep a list of who you think is a D and who's an R, who's an independent. On election day, you go stand at the polling place, hand out our ballot, sample ballot. If at 4:00, anybody you identified as a Democrat is not showing up, you leave the polling place, get in your car, and go out and try to convince the Ds to come in and vote. That's politics. That's the way I learned politics. So after that,
you were an alderman for a couple of years, and then in 76,
5 years, actually. 5 years I ran for alderman. And incidentally, I won that first race for alderman against a sitting Republican alderman who was a pretty good alderman by 12 votes. And I often think, what if I had lost by 12 votes? Would I have gone on in politics? I'm not sure I would have,
Hmm.
but I won that, was in there for 5 years, met a lot of the same kind of people that I met later in Congress. There was an older gentleman by the name of Red Villa, who was the alderman of the 11th Ward. He was kind of a Tip O'Neill type, always smoking cigars. He had a tavern down in South City on the Mississippi River, and all the barge workers would come in and cash their checks in his bar. And I'd go down and learn from him. He taught me how to be a public servant, what was important. One time he said to me, look, your constituents don't care about the budget and all these highfalutin issues you're going to deal with in the board. He said, what they care about is their tree trimmed? Is the sidewalk broken? Are there holes in the street or the alley that need to be fixed? If you take care of that, you will get reelected, no matter how you vote. It was kind of what Tip O'Neill told us some years later, which all of politics is local. And that's the way
what Gretchen Whitmer would tell us today. I mean, she was elected on Fix the Potholes message up in Michigan. All right, so you're at alderman, and I think at the time you were with the city council was half black, half white. You learned how to deal with interracial politics there, and you're definitely dealing with kind of machine politics in St. Louis. And then you decided to run for Congress in '76. And the thing that struck me most about that is that you went out every single day and night, often with your folks, with your parents in tow and your wife, and knocked on, you estimate, 50,000 plus doors in that first campaign. I mean, just, Dick, tell me, first of all, just kind of like what that does to the knuckles, literally, to the hand of all the knocking and shaking of hands. But also, what did you learn about the American people and about politics? Because most politicians these days, as you know, they decide they want to run. Their job is to go raise enormous amounts of money from very rich people. They don't do any door knocking anymore. And, the more money they raise, the bigger their ad buy can be. And that's typically their path into politics, as opposed to 50,000, wooden doors. So tell us more about kind of what you learned during that process.
Well, it was a tremendous education. First of all, I had no money. And I couldn't raise any money. So I knew that I had to have a different route to try to win. Nobody gave me a chance to win. I was up against a really popular state senator in the primary, and the head of the board of aldermen, who was a Republican, in the general. I raised a total amount of money of $70,000 for both races. It was all from family and friends. I didn't have any PAC money. I didn't have money from any outside organization. But what I learned going door to door is what I'd already learned when I was precinct captain of the 2nd precinct, was that people love to be approached at their home. They appreciate it. They want to know you. The main thing you have to get across in an election is, who are you? People vote for people, not issues. Now, there are some people that are really into some issues and they vote strictly on that. But the vast majority of people vote for people that they know and they like and they trust. And the last word is the most important word. I went door religiously, not only in that first campaign, but in every other campaign. And every time I came back to St. Louis from Washington when I was in Congress, I would go door to door 12 hours a day. And when I first started it, I thought, man, this is going to be hard. And do I really want to do this? And it's going to be boring. I loved it. It was energizing. I met these people. The vast majority of the people I met, whatever their political views, were just good people. And I don't think the Midwest, I mean, we got great people in the Midwest. They're kind, they're nice, you know, all that. But they're the same as Americans everywhere. They want the right things for their family, their community, their state, their country. And they understand the importance of self-governance. The fact that we are a democracy and the people run the show. And it was the best thing I ever did in my whole life. It's the way I ran for president in 1988. Again, no money, same story. And it's the way I conducted myself in public office. If you're trying to represent people, you'd better know what they think. You'd better be willing to listen to them. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you have to show them the respect that you give them when you get on their porch and ask them their opinion. I've had people come up to me, you know, after I was out of office, and they'd say to me, you know, I'm a Republican. I hated every vote you made, but I always voted for you because you came to my door and I think you cared about us.
Well, I want to talk about that because the word compromise is probably the most ubiquitous word in the book. And, you know, a lot of people, especially in the kind of Washington chattering classes, bristle at the word compromise because they say, oh, it's, you know, the people who believe in that are sellouts. They're centrists who do little deals and accomplish nothing big for the country. You know, there's all kinds of ways of demeaning the notion of compromise. But for you in the book, it is not just a word or a way of being, it's a central governing concept that you believe is essential to a democratic republic. And I hate to say it, but I feel like it's a word that is not in circulation much these days and is more often vilified than embraced. So tell us about, you know, why you emphasize that so much, both in your, you know, your personal life, but also in your public life.
This is why I wrote the book. I really wanted a potential reader to understand what has to go on within this committee of 535 people, which is Congress, in order to resolve huge controversial issues among 340 million Americans. And I wanted them to understand that the only way self-governance can work and produce results for the people who are running the show is if you're able to compromise and find a thread that will go through 218 people in the House and 60 votes usually in the Senate. It's really hard to do. I mean, it is like pulling teeth out of a chicken. It is excruciatingly difficult. But when you do it, when you get those votes, and that's all you care about is how do we get the votes? How do we get this done? It is a rush that I can't even explain to anybody. I mean, when we finally passed the George H.W. Bush first big step to balance the budget, and then the second big step with Clinton, I was on cloud nine. I couldn't, I'm in awe of what we do. I'm in awe of it. Self-governance is really hard. Our founders in 1789 had a radical idea. The idea was the first place in the world that had even thought about this. They said we can govern ourselves. Really? We don't have to have a king. We don't have to have an emperor. No, we can do this ourselves. But it always has to be, and I don't think I said it this way in the book, if you just think about it, 535 people in the room to decide on the budget, on immigration, on abortion, on you name it. Yeah, that's the deal. And when you get it done, it's magnificent. It's majestic. And let me end with this. I saw a lot of really tough issues get decided. NAFTA, I can go down the list. And at the end of every compromise that we got done, at least a third to half of the American people were really angry. They hated the compromise. They didn't want us to give in to that compromise. But they were willing to grudgingly accept the result because they thought the process by which we got the compromise was fair. They were heard. They had a vote. Everybody got to vote. They just didn't win this time. Maybe they win next time, but they didn't win this time. If we were in a dictatorship, which we someday pretty soon may be, this country would be in a state of revolt every day, all day. People don't fully, and I'm not blaming anybody. I understand. We assume this. We just think that's the way it's always been. That's the way it'll always be. This is a precious gift that we were given, and only we can keep it. If we don't keep it, if the people don't keep it, it'll go away. It's fragile.
And I want to ask you about the specific threats that you think we're facing right now, but I wonder, kind of big picture too, Dick, if you just feel as if democracy itself, the concept, the practice of it, is underappreciated these days. I mean, your parents are members of the greatest generation. They saw the global risk to democracy that Hitler posed. You obviously grew up firmly believing in the power and the promise of American democracy, but in a way, I sometimes worry that we've gotten lazy about democracy, that we've taken it for granted. We figure that either it's the thing that doesn't work very well for us, or it's the thing that'll always be around, or both. But we don't necessarily recognize what you said, which is that there is a stewardship aspect to democracy that we all need to be engaged in. So talk a little bit about that, and to be even more provocative, I wonder to what extent you feel as if sometimes good government groups are a part of the problem, because there's a lot of language around the corruption of the government, corrupt politicians, who are the puppets of the special interests. The whole thing is rigged against you, all that kind of stuff. And I wonder to some extent if the kind of sector that we work in can at times, be a part of the problem of creating a negative narrative about government for the sake of trying to reform government.
Yeah, there's just so much negative rhetoric today. Everything is negative. The pollsters tell us that a vast majority of the American people now don't trust any politician, any institution, and they don't trust any information. And that's another subject, but it's related to all this.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
So all the rhetoric is democracy's a failure. Congress can't act. The president doesn't get anything done. And then you've got all the negative advertising that politics is now doing. So it piles on. Civic classes, I guess, aren't taught as much as they used to be. So young people don't learn about the majesty of democracy and the benefits of it, and the need to compromise. So the whole information culture that we have today is pointing out the failures, follies of democracy, to the point that I'm really worried that a lot of people are going to say, this just doesn't work. These people can't get anything done. I never get my views recognized in these compromises. To hell with it. Let's just let one person do it. Let's do it like China does it. And that's a better way. And I'm really worried about that, because the whole culture today is negative. You don't hear any of the positive about how democracy is awesome.
Yep. I think at one point in the book you write that that the only alternative to democracy is governing by violence.
Sure.
And what you meant by that is not that it means that every non-democratic regime is a military regime. China is an example of that, but its ways of governing are governing through force and violence, whether that's soft force or hard force.
Yep.
So when we think about the challenges that we're facing today, and there are many, and that's why you are so involved with our organization and spend so many hours of your week working on democracy renewal. You break it down in the book into three things. Number one, extreme polarization. Number two, as this is a quote, the gradual destruction of a healthy information environment. And number three, efforts to undermine election processes. So I would love to go through those just kind of one by one, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions and more conversation. So let's start with polarization. When you went and got into office in '76, obviously much less so. Right about when you got out, you started seeing the rise of pretty extreme polarization, though, where there was just a tremendous amount of fighting in Congress, and fighting became kind of the thing to do as opposed to governing. What do you attribute to that incredible shift over the course of your congressional career?
So to emphasize your point, I think we're almost as divided in this country as we were in 1860. I can't prove that, but that's my sense. And what I want to first say is that when I was in office and I did town hall meetings in addition to going door to door all the time, we had all the kinds of disagreements we're having right now. I had conspiracy theorists come. I had to my meetings, I'd have abortion advocates or, anti-abortion. I had the whole realm, gun control, all the issues. Everybody was really amped up, as they always are, about disagreeing. But they weren't hateful. I would thank anybody who came to state their views. I thanked them for coming. I said, that's why we're doing the meeting. We want you to listen to one another, and I want to listen to you. But people weren't hateful. Now, people don't want to be in the same community, our country, with people they bitterly disagree with. What's changed? And I thought about this long and hard. Well, I think the main thing that's changed, because we had all those disagreements then, is the information culture in the country. I think it's really changed. Yes, there's politicization of cable networks. We got, Fox on the right and others on the right, and MSNBC, and I guess you could say CNN on the left. But if you really step back and look at this, I think the main factor, the most significant factor in polarization today and the hate machine is social media. And if you look at their business plan, which you and I have talked about a lot, if you're on the platform, they know everything about you. So they use AI algorithms. They used to call them algorithms. It's really just AI for the last 10, 12 years to boost to you information to keep you angry, anxious, and upset so that they will keep your attention and their ads have more value. And they're making a lot of money. They got all the money in advertising. So I think this is a major factor in dividing the American people, and not just dividing them, but hatefully dividing them. Mm-hmm. To the point that I conclude if 50% or 40% of the American people hate another 40% of the American people, you can't have a democracy. Self-governance won't work. If I'm a member of, people complain to me about Congress being dysfunctional. I said, yeah, it's pretty dysfunctional. There are some bright spots like the problem solvers and other things, but yeah, it's not as functional as it should be. But don't blame the members. Look at the American people. If the American people are divided bitterly, Congress is a reflection of the American people. That's self-governance. So members aren't going to be able to make a compromise because they'll be unelected immediately. So I think the information culture is at the bottom of this problem.
Do you think that there's enough awareness about that? I mean, obviously, when Fox hit the scene and MSNBC, was kind of the counterpoint to it, there was a lot of talk about more of the radicalization of voices on cable, but I still feel like it's just not, it's obviously because we work on it here at Issue One, we think a lot about it. But in your travels outside of your Issue One, work, do you hear enough about it? There's a lot of talk about gerrymandering and ranked choice voting and open primaries and other solutions to reducing polarization. But I feel as if this still isn't top of mind for enough people. The information environment isn't top of mind as much as it should be.
No, it's not. I don't hear it from people. They don't understand it. I'm not blaming people. It's just, it's not understood. The social media platforms the way they operate is opaque. Nobody kind of knows about this AI thing and how they boost information and organize your information for you. And if you really stop and think about it, Vladimir Putin and President Xi control and manipulate the information in their countries, kind of like Hitler did with Joseph Goebbels in Germany. If you're a dictatorial model, an authoritarian model, the first thing you got to do is control the information. We have turned control over the information culture over to private organizations that have a profit motive. And I don't blame them for I'm a capitalist. I want everybody to make as much money as they can. But if their profit motive and their modus operandi is going to wreck the democracy, we need to have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to figure out how to stop them or put guardrails around them so that they don't use these algorithms the way they've been using them for 10 years.
So you kind of went from one to two, and which is great. Number three that you list is efforts to undermine elections, and as you say in the book, this is something that you never could have expected you'd have to deal with in this country. The fact that there are groups of people, significant groups of people in America, who are hostile to the process and are actually willing to unlawfully, unconstitutionally undermine the results of our free and fair elections here. So talk a bit about that and about not only where you think that has come from, but what we need to do to stop it in the future. Because obviously, we have some people on staff here at Issue One who used to do international democracy building work, and they frequently point out to our fellow staffers that when a country enters into the process of not believing the results of an election, when you have half the country not believing that whoever is elected is legitimate, that's the beginning of the typical beginning, like classic textbook beginning of the death spiral of a democracy, is when people just stop believing in the results and the entire thing looks illegitimate. So talk to me a bit about that, Dick, because again, it's something that I know you could never have imagined when you were in Congress, that all of a sudden there'd be people who just would be literally working to undermine legitimate results.
Well, it's exactly right. I have to go back to what I said a minute ago about people being willing to grudgingly accept a compromise because they thought the process was fair. If people don't think an election has been fairly run or the results have been fairly figured out, you're done. It's all about trust. People have to trust that our electoral infrastructure is doing a valid job, that they're not cheating, that they're not allowing one side or the other. I mean, this is like if you didn't have referees in an NFL game, you wouldn't have a a football game. So we have to return people to trusting the results, which means you got to get people to trust information. We're back to information.
Yep.
And that has to be tackled or we're in big trouble. The last thing I'd say is that we have to continue to support people who work in the electoral mechanism infrastructure in the country. And I'm proud of Issue 1, National Council for Election Integrity. You've brought these election workers from around the country to DC to celebrate their service, to celebrate their work. These people are awesome. I mean, when you say, I have faith in the future of America because the people are good, these people are really good. These are fabulous people who've done this their whole career. They're doing it for the right reasons, and they do a great job. And we need to all support them in every way we can.
All right, well, let's open it up for the audience, Dick. The first one is a good friend of ours, Kevin Kosar at AEI. This is a very kind of Washington question, but I love it. When, why, and how did the famous Gephardt rule get created?
Yeah, right. So after I got to the House, I was, new and didn't know anything. Tip O'Neill took me aside one day, I think in the first or second year I was there. I happened to get on the Ways and Means Committee in my first term, which was a huge, great thing, a lucky thing. Dick Bowling, who was my mentor, who was a fabulous representative from Kansas City, great friend of Tip's. He got Tip influenced to put me on Ways and Means. So Tip took me aside and he said, look, we got to pass this debt ceiling every year or whatever. He said it's everybody knows they have to vote for it, but nobody wants to vote for it because it's a bad vote to your public. So we need somebody to go around and whip the votes for the debt ceiling. It's kind of like, when you join a new organization, you take out the trash. And I'd like you to take out the trash. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I, spent days and hours before every one of these votes going around just begging people to vote for this, even though nobody wanted to vote for it. And we'd always get it passed by 1 or 2 votes. It was always the perils of Pauline. And finally, I went back to Tip and I said, this is crazy. We're spending all this time and effort. We know it has to pass. We know it's going to pass. The decision is really not on the debt ceiling. The decision is made with the budget. If we spend more than we take in, we're creating debt when we do a budget of that nature. So why don't we just make it an automatic thing? When the budget's passed, the debt ceiling will be increased to accommodate the budget that we all voted for and passed. He said, that's a great idea. So I went to the Ways and Means Committee and we put the legislation together. We got it passed as a rules change, I think. And then we went over to the Senate and got them to do it. And it worked for about 10 years. When Newt Gingrich did the contract with America, one of the provisions of his contract was to get rid of the Gephardt rule, which I'm sure he regretted later. But that's when we got rid of it, and it's never come back, and I don't expect it to come back. Yeah. And no, it's a lever for either side that wants to blow the place up. I tell you one more story I think's in the book. So we were having a fight with Newt over the budget right after he had become speaker and Clinton was in office. I think it was 95, 94. That was 95. And we're in a White House meeting, Al Gore, Clinton, the Republican leadership, Democratic leadership. And Newt turns to Clinton and he says, the problem here is you got a gun to my head. I need a gun to your head. Your gun is the veto. You can veto anything, and then we have to scramble around and do something on the debt ceiling or whatever. My gun is I can shut the government down. And I'm going to shut the government down if you don't agree to the budget we want. After the meeting, Clinton took me aside and he said, "Do you think he's going to do this?" I said, "You bet he's going to do it." I said, "We need to be out in front of the people every day saying, if you have a veto of anything, you don't shut the government down. You put together another bill and see if the president will sign that. That's the way the Constitution works. You don't shut the government down." So after they'd closed the national parks and a lot of other bad things that happened, Newt came off of that and decided that that wasn't a great idea politically. But that's where we are still today. It's the same ball of wax, and we're going through it right now in the House and in the Senate.
I turned on the radio this morning, and the first thing that I heard was literally the first phrase I heard was government shutdown. And it went right through my mind like a weather report because we hear it so often today, oh, government shutdown, of course. So I hear you and think that this kind of performative politics that's constantly bringing the government to the brink is a massive part of the problem. So dispiriting.
And it makes the people say, why do we have these 535 people? They can't function.
Yeah.
Let's let one person do it.
Yeah. So it looks like there's a hunger, Dick, for even more solutions and details here. Leo Sprecher, who's a good friend of ours at Issue One and supporter, says, what do you feel are the best current movements to reduce anger-producing media and the big money corruption of Congress? Leo, I can answer the second part of that question, which is that the fight around campaign finance reform has been stalled. And it breaks my heart to say that because I wrote a book about money in politics, but there are unfortunately, so many other fires burning right now, including election protection, that people have taken their eye off the ball, including the folks who would have to get bills done in Congress when it comes to the big money corruption of Congress. We will get back to it, but right now there isn't a big movement around it. In terms of the first one, Dick, when it comes to reducing anger-producing media, I like the way you say that, Leo. Why don't we talk a little bit more, Dick, about specifics of what it takes to kind of create a healthier information environment in this country. I don't know if you all saw it, but just last week, a handful of very large foundations came out with a bold announcement that they're going to commit $500 million to rebuilding local journalism in America. Places like the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the Kansas City Star, or even more appropriately, small town newspapers and medium town papers that have just completely collapsed. So that's a piece of the puzzle, is kind of getting back to newspapering. There are lots and lots of studies that have shown that vibrant newspapers in communities where there are vibrant newspapers, there's actually less polarization and there's more civic engagement. That's a piece of it. But Dick, you co-chair our Council for Responsible Social Media. Maybe talk more about what you think the solutions are to taming the digital information environment and creating an environment that leans more into facts and away from conspiracy theories and hate.
Well, the platforms have always argued that they're just a dumb pipe. They don't produce any content. The people produce the content, and they just are a pipe. That's really untrue. They're the most intelligent pipe in human history. First of all, they know everything about you. Just imagine if Fox or MSNBC knew down to the micro level, down to the individual level, who was watching and what would light their fire. That's what they have. And they use AI to amp people up every minute of every day. Now, we all believe in freedom of speech, which you just talked about. I mean, you have to have freedom of speech. And we can't get around that. We shouldn't. But there are pieces of legislation that are already out there that I think could really make a difference. First of all, privacy legislation. At the heart of the platform's business is to be able to scrape your data 24/7, so they know everything about you. They don't even give proper privacy options to users. So privacy legislation would really be a big help. Transparency legislation, so we know how they're managing the information, how they're manipulating the information for fun and profit. And if we knew that, then we could make maybe some suggestions on what guardrails should be put around the way they use algorithms. You get into free speech stuff pretty quick, and I get all that. But again, they've said they don't produce the content. We're not against anybody being shut off, anybody being canceled. That's not what this is about. It's about actively promoting information that will keep people really upset. So there are some solutions there that we can work on. We're working on very hard. The good news is that I'm seeing more understanding by Congress of these issues than they did a year ago. I mean, it is really heartening to me. Like, we have Kids Online Safety Act. We've been working on that for a year. We got a shot at getting that through both houses of Congress. I don't know if we will, but boy, I'll tell you, I've talked to Republican members, Democratic members, and they get it, and they're upset about it, and they're ready to go.
Yep. Leo, I didn't mean to skip over the campaign finance thing. And in fact, Ron Kind, Dick, is on this call, and Ron, of course, served with you in Congress and brings it up. So let's spend a second on it, given the fact that your first race cost $70,000 and now a viable race for Congress is at least $2 million. So speak a little bit about the kind of metastasizing of the campaign finance problem from 1976 to the present, and what do you think? What kind of effect do you think it has on the system?
It's corrosive. It's got to be changed, and it's very hard to change. I mean, it is almost impossible to change. When I came to Congress, there were members who raised $1,000 for their whole campaign. Today, as you said, it's $2 million. It's corrosive. The people don't trust public servants much anymore because they think they're all bought and paid for. And I understand it. Even if they aren't, if that's their belief, it's corrosive to having a democracy. So what do you do about it? Well, the Supreme Court has said that money equals speech or whatever. So it's really hard to get your hands around it. I think I was leader when we passed the last campaign finance reform bill, McCain-Feingold. In fact, John McCain came to my office and we pulled in Republican members of the House to lobby them to vote for McCain-Feingold. So it's been a long time since anything was done. In the book, in the last chapter, I have my probably crazy, impossible little plan. And it's the only thing I can think of that in this atmosphere that can make a change. And here's the way it would work. You would say to any candidate for Congress, if you want to run for Congress, if you will voluntarily submit to only raising individual contributions of 1,000 or less, or whatever you come to an agreement on, and forego any PAC money, any big contributions from anybody, and to denounce dark money if it comes into your race, you will get dollar for dollar public additional funding money from the federal government. Now, you would think nobody would ever agree to this because their opponent doesn't have to agree to it, and they'd flood them with money. But the big change that's happened with fundraising in my time and now is internet fundraising. We didn't have that when I was in Congress. That's a big deal. You can get $5 from somebody, $10. So if you could match that with federal funding, if you agree to those limits and those restrictions, then you can go to your people in the campaign and say, hey, look, I've made this commitment. I'm only going to get money from you. My opponent hasn't, if he hasn't, and he's taken money from the special interest. So who do you want to elect? If you want to control me, if you want to have power over me, you got to help pay for my campaign. And if you don't care, if you just want the special interest to run the show, then leave it the way it is.
Yeah. David Skaggs, also a former congressman, as you know, weighed in and said, even with Citizens United, either House or Senate could use its rulemaking authority under Article 1 to impose fundraising limits. That's an interesting idea, David, and we've thought about that here. I mean, I can tell you that I've interviewed many members, current members of Congress, about campaign finance, and they universally hate it. Universally, they just say it ruins their life. It's the worst part of the job. They have no time to do their committee hearings, to read anything, to even do the constituent outreach they want to, because they're spending so much time with a phone pressed against their head dialing for dollars. So something does have to give here. Unfortunately, in the next 18 months, now is not the moment. We've got to secure the 24 election and make serious progress on the information environment stuff. But we will return to this work in a serious way.
Nick, I just got to give you one story on the money thing.
Yeah.
So we lost the House for the first time in a way long time in 1994. And Newt was now Speaker. So right after the election, I invited him out to my house in Virginia, and I cooked dinner. And it was just Newt and his wife and me and Jane. And I cooked dinner. And when we finished dinner, I said, Newt, you did a fabulous job. I congratulate you. It's awesome that you won. I said, how did you do it? And he looked at me and he said, money. That's it. He said, I raised 30 million bucks, soft money. It was allowed then. And he said, I spent it in the races that we had to win. So after that, then I spent the rest of my time in Congress as leader doing little more than raising money. I spent half of my time on the phone and then doing fundraising on the weekends all over the country to try to match the money. And that's what they do today. That's what you have to do. Money is the mother's milk of politics. And if you don't figure out a different way, it's going to break the trust of the American people in the veracity of our democracy.
Yep. Dick, we have 5 minutes left, and I've got two big ideas that people have asked. You're going to have to do these quickly. Number one, the population of the country has expanded significantly even since you entered office. We've accrued another 150 to 180 million more Americans. What do you think about the idea of expanding the size of the House?
I think it's a worthy idea. I wouldn't. You can't expand it a lot, but to be more representative of the people and to make people feel like they've got access to their representatives, that makes some sense to me. So that should be explored. Okay,
the second big idea, electoral college. I mean, it's a very strange relic and a big compromise that was made mainly to appease some of the southern states. Do you think that it is worth keeping the electoral college around for the long-term future?
I'd rather get rid of it. I think the chance of amending the Constitution to do that is zero. There has been an effort by some organization for probably 20 years to get states to pass a law that they can, I don't know if it would pass muster ultimately, but to pass a law to say that they would have their electors go to Washington in the electoral college process to vote for not who necessarily won their state, but who won the popular vote in the country. I don't know if that's an answer. This is one that I think it's very hard to change, and it's one of the imperfections of probably many in our Constitution. And you have to remember the Constitution is the product of a magnificent compromise. That's the only way they got the votes.
Yep. A third and final big idea, perhaps more achievable, as this anonymous attendee says. What about fusion voting? Are you a believer in fusion voting?
Yeah, I understand fusion voting, and I think it would be a step in the right direction. I'm also for ranked choice voting because I think he would get more middle of the road people coming to Congress rather than people on the far left or the far right. That's really important. Gerrymandering, there's all kinds of ideas about that, but that hasn't been very easy to fix. Ranked choice voting, fusion voting might move more people to the center.
Yeah. Well, we're down to the very end here, Dick. Listen, folks, this was an utter joy for me to read, and I've known Dick for quite a while, and he's been working very closely with us for about 2 years now. But this still was a joy to read. It is, as you have seen in the last hour, this is a person who's capable of taking very complicated issues and distilling them to concrete language. But in addition to that, his eloquence about his American experience and about our democracy is also extraordinary. Dick, you really, I know that sometimes people say this type of thing, but you really are a national treasure. The time and energy that you pumped into our democracy in our country, and still do today, into all the causes that you're working on, it's just been fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing this time with our audience.
I'm just a simple, lucky little guy who loves this democracy and wants to keep it going for our kids and beyond. And so that's why I do this. The last thing I'll say is that any proceeds from sale of this book are going to be contributed to issue 1 and all their great activities. So if you're buying the book, if you want to buy the book, and you can make a fire out of it, but the money's going to issue 1 and promoting democracy.
It's a better read than it would be a fire starter. So I hope you all buy it. 535, not 1. Dick Gephardt, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.